Welcome to this week of the Inspire Sessions. I'm your host, Ben Fisher, and this week we have Brooke Zuzow-Lutz, super inspiring person. Thanks again for watching. Make sure you subscribe, like, share as often as possible. Let's get into it. Hey, Brooke, how are you?
Hey.
Good to see your face.
Oh, good to see you.
I want to talk about who you are and what you do, and then I want to segue into OCD, which is one of your specialties. So if you don't mind, just give me a little background about who you are and why you are who you are and what you do.
I've been in social work now for 15 years. And I got into it because when I was a teen, I had a hard time. I went through some depressive episodes, had some anxiety issues, and I felt really inspired at that time to overcome those things and help others with it. And then that was it. I went to grad school, got my master's in social work, and then started working in school-based settings with kids. Did that for a while. Moved to the hospital settings where I was really doing more social work, which is different than therapy. And that therapy is individual, face-to-face individual, whereas social work, you're doing all sorts of stuff. You're looking for resources, access to things and stuff like that. So I did that. And then I went on to supervise other therapists and social workers. And then Transcend came alive. Thank goodness. We love it. My private practice, Transcend Mental Health Therapeutics. And there I do individual therapy for kids really age like 11 and up. And I'm doing all sorts of stuff there. A lot of different anxiety issues, stress management, working with a lot of moms, a lot of students, a lot of teens, on really all sorts of different things. And some of it not being exact diagnosis you'd find in the DSM. Some of it just being life can be tough. How do I cope with these stressors that come my way without falling apart, really? So that's what I do. Areas of expertise are going to be, like I said, anxiety, stress, OCD, which I know we're talking about today, perfectionistic tendencies, having to have things just right, phobias. I do a lot of work with phobias, fear of leaving the house, fear of vomit, fear of germs, stuff like that. Depression, of course. And those are really the big ones. Those are the big ones that I treat. And student life is a big one. Students.
The fear of vomit one is it hits home for me, not for me personally, although obviously I don't love vomit,
right.
But my daughter if you make a noise, just jokingly, it sets her off and she gets extremely upset.
Yes.
So that's funny that you mentioned that.
Edimophobia.
Yeah. It sounds like maybe because she's very dramatic in everything that she does, but it just seems a little bit different with this. It really sets her off. She'll cry about it and maybe go in her room. It's we've learned not to do that.
Sure.
But it's all over the place. People joke like that all the time. It's on videos. Maybe I'll have to have a conversation with you about that. Maybe get a little session with you set up. I didn't know. First off, I just think it's so cool that you've started your own practice. You've betted on yourself. And that's what's so inspiring to me about you and about anybody who's created their own business and they're promoting and building their own brand, because that's hard to do. It really is. It's hard enough to get a job and go work for somebody else and make a paycheck. But when you do your own thing, you play every role, especially at the beginning. If you start doing well with it, then you can start to build on that and start to hire people. And I don't know if that's even in line with what you do, because what you do is basically it's you, speaking with somebody. Maybe you'll get an assistant, or maybe you'll bring on some other therapists that work underneath you someday.
Yeah.
But I just think it's so cool, and I think it's inspiring. And the big reason why I wanted to talk with you, and just the fact that you have such a specialty in OCD. I think it's an interesting topic. And I'll say that I feel like people self-diagnose themselves with OCD more than most things. OCD and ADHD.
Yeah.
You hear people say, and I've said it too, oh, that's my OCD kicking in.
Right.
And I think that's an interesting concept, and maybe you can speak on that just
Mhm.
to kick us off, your opinion on that. Like,
Yeah.
is there truth to that? Are there
Yeah.
levels of OCD where maybe you just got it a little bit? Or is it like, where's the line? And
Yeah.
I probably have a question later on where it talks about like, how do I know if I have OCD? But
Right.
we can tackle it now too. Give me your thoughts on it.
I think, and I don't think anyone means any harm by saying, "Oh, I'm just a little OCD," or "There, here comes my OCD." But we do have to remember that's downplaying what the person with OCD is actually experiencing, right? Because for the person
Mm,
with OCD, to really meet criteria is, hey, this is causing a significant impact in my life. One of the scales we use is called the Yale Brown to measure OCD. And when you look at the questions and the amount of hours they ask people they're spending on this, eight plus hours a day at times on obsessions and compulsions. And if you can imagine, how much mental energy and how draining
mm,
something like that is, can you be a little bit OCD? I would say no. Can I be a little bit more perfectionistic about certain things? Sure. But can I be a little OCD? Not really. Right? You either are or you aren't. And remember, these things cause a disturbance in the way I function. Right?
mm.
For example, if I'm obsessing about something and I feel like I have to do a compulsion, it's impacting my ability to function when I can't do other things. I must spend this much time on my compulsion, right? Or something terrible will happen, right? This is what's going on in the mind. And it really is in their mind, something terrible will happen unless I finish this. It's definitely being a little rigid and, oh, I need things a certain way is very much different than I have full blown OCD that
Yeah.
interferes with my life.
Yeah, I think you answered it very well and very clear. And my background is addiction, right? And
Mhm.
overcoming addiction and recovery. And I always like to, when I can, try to relate things to that. And in that field, there is a lot of minimizing the issue
Oh,
with
yeah.
humor. People in recovery that have gone through it, they can tell jokes. They can joke about it because they've lived it. When people on the outside that haven't experienced it and they don't really understand it start to say certain things, it is minimizing, maybe dehumanizing, and just making it not a big deal
Yeah.
when it is.
Right.
It really is. And it's a disease, and it's an insidious
Mhm.
disease that causes a lot of harm. And there was something you said in there, it made me think of when your life becomes unmanageable,
Right.
because that's a clear defining moment of addiction. It's like, because a lot of people struggle with the same thing. They may drink 4 or 5 times throughout the week, and but they don't have any bad consequences, or things don't, they're not getting arrested or losing their job type thing. They're a functional alcoholic. And there's this line where when your life becomes unmanageable, it's like, that's it. You know what I mean? There's no like, there's no denying it at that point.
Right.
And that's something that I struggled with
Sure.
in my addiction, because my life, it was on its way to be unmanageable.
Yeah.
It definitely was. And in some ways it did become unmanageable because my wife was extremely unhappy, and I was
Sure.
hurting myself and putting people in danger, really, when it comes
Yeah.
down to it, without getting into details. So yeah, I think about that, and I think about how that caused me to stay sick longer than I needed to,
Yeah.
right? I guess like what I'm poking at with it is, if somebody's on the fence about whether they really have it, like their life is becoming unmanageable because of OCD,
Yeah.
like how can they, is there some sort of test they can take, or is it that they just call somebody like you and say, this is what I'm
Yeah.
experiencing, do you think I have
Yeah.
it?
I think one of the hardest parts is what you're describing right here, because in order to admit my life is becoming unmanageable, I must be willing to be vulnerable. Right.
Mm,
And when I'm
yeah.
putting myself out there to be vulnerable, there's a chance I could get rejected, could get hurt. I have to admit, hey, something's wrong. That's a really hard thing to do. And I do think that's something that holds a lot of individuals back from getting help from a wide variety of things, because that is hard. It puts me in the line to possibly get hurt, to have to admit
Yeah.
that. And then comes the part where, gosh, I got to change this. And here's the thing, some of these issues we're discussing, although they are interfering with my ability to function, I'm used to it. I'm used to
Yeah.
living this way. And then there comes changes involved. I got to change everything about my life now to make this more manageable. So I think with OCD, or really any problem, uh, one of the big things is having the insight, right? The ability to see something's wrong. I need help. A lot of times people don't have that. I don't really know that this is happening. So that's when our loved ones come in. People we love being able
Yeah.
to say to us, hey, I need to talk to you.
Hmm.
We need to get you some help, right? And here's the other part, shame. I feel shame that I have to admit that I'm having a hard time. And that
Yeah.
that doesn't feel good. I got to really experience that feeling now, because now I'm really admitting it. So now that feeling comes to
Yeah.
the forefront. And how do I deal with that feeling?
Yeah. I love that you bring that up, the whole admission process. And that's, yeah, I wrote this book recently. I don't know if you saw that. It's a short little journal style book, but it has 9 kind of tools that I used in recovery or to get myself to recovery.
Sure.
And the first one is basically the first step of the 12 steps. And it's you have to admit you have a problem
Mm,
before you can solve it. And it's the only one in the book where I say this is mandatory. Like nothing's going
yeah.
to get fixed
Have
unless
to.
you admit that it's an issue.
Mhm.
Obviously, the book is very geared towards people struggling with addiction. In some ways, I wish I would have worded it a bit differently because at some points in the book, it seems like you've done something wrong that you have to admit. And
Right.
that's not the case. That's not what's
Right.
happening here. It's not because you've done something wrong. You just need to admit that something is wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
Doesn't mean you're a bad person or something's necessarily wrong with you.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that's clear in
Yeah,
it
I
all.
love
And I
that.
love that I love that it correlates. OCD correlates. Obviously, addiction is very much an obsession, you
Sure.
know, one
Oh,
that
yeah.
rewires the brain in a way. And maybe that's an interesting question before we get into the list of questions that I have
Yeah.
is addiction a type of OCD? Like what is the correlation between the two?
Oh, I've never been asked that one before. It's a new one. With an obsession, this can be about all sorts of different stuff, some that really don't make sense. A lot of times with OCD, it's an irrational fear that becomes an obsession. And maybe this will segue into how, like in a real life time, these things can come about with OCD. Now, we might be predisposed to anxiety and OCD issues, right? I might be in my genetics somewhere. And what's really interesting is we have thousands of thoughts a day. Some we're aware of, some we're not. Sometimes we have these spontaneous, random, really weird, if we put a judgment to it, weird thoughts pop in. That's like, oh, that's weird. Why would I ever think something like that? Have you ever had one of those?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
All the
it's like
time.
that was an odd one. So the example I use a lot for this is like, okay, you see a bus drive by, and let's say it pops into your mind, what if I jumped in that bus? Now that thought, you might, well, that's weird. Why the heck would I think something like that? And if I'm not predisposed to anxiety and OCD, then I just take it like that. I say, oh, that was weird and interesting. All right. And I move on with my day. Now, the person who's predisposed to anxiety and OCD takes that and says, oh my gosh, danger. That's what their brain does. Why would I ever think something like that? What if I
Mm,
did? Do I want to kill myself? Oh gosh, am I suicidal? Oh no. And so what happens, that keeps going and going because I'm obsessed. So even later in the day, why did I think that? Oh my gosh, something's
mm,
wrong with me. Do I need to check myself into the hospital? Um, and the thought won't go away. So then what the person with OCD does is I have to do something to make this, when this is where the compulsions come in. And we're talking about harm OCD right now, by the way. Uh,
Yeah.
so now, all right, what if I prayed 10 times the specific prayer? And this slowly happens that reassure me that, okay, I don't want to kill myself. And now I feel okay for a while. Now, the issue, because we're talking about the OCD cycle, then comes the anxiety. And the anxiety is so big with some of these obsessions that pop up with OCD. They are upsetting thoughts that no one would ever want to have about all sorts of stuff that no one would want to think this stuff, right? And so now it's like, gosh, I got to get rid of it. So I'm going to do a compulsion that provides temporary relief. And compulsions can be all sorts of different things that gives me this temporary relief. But the issue is the obsession comes back because it's temporary. This relief is temporary. And it just keeps going like this. And the OCD becomes out of control. Now I have to do a compulsion. I got to say the prayer 20 times to neutralize this anxiety. And it keeps growing. So that's the nature of it. And I could talk about it all day, really. But we have to keep in mind that these obsessions that pop in, some of them are what we call ego dystonic thoughts. And I want to hit on this with OCD because I feel like there's a misconception that someone must be crazy to have this. But with OCD, what's different is that they're ego dystonic thoughts. What is that? What that is that these are thoughts that are disgusting to me. They are against my morals as a human being. I do not want to have these thoughts. I would never act on anything involved with this thought. So that's this ego dystonic and really causes a ton of anxiety because, gosh, who wants to think this is disgusting? I hate this. Right? Does that
Right.
make sense? Why
It
it
makes
is?
absolute
Yeah.
sense, and it's wild. Like I've never heard that ego dystonic. Is
Mhm.
that the word?
Yeah.
It's very interesting because it's like, yeah, I think many of us, I would like to imagine all of us, just so I feel like I'm not the only one on the planet. I feel like many of us have had a thought like that. Something
Yeah.
pops in your head and you're like, ugh, like, why did
That's
I even
gross.
think that? It's not
Right.
anywhere in the realm of who I am or
That's
what
right.
I think,
It's a
and that
word.
it's part of the human fabric of how our
Yeah.
brains work and function. If somebody's having these ego dystonic thoughts, when do those ego dystonic thoughts turn into OCD?
So this would be if we're talking about actual criteria of repeating obsession that again is interfering with my ability to function. I can't stop thinking
Yeah,
this. Okay.
yeah,
So that's when we're reaching clinical terms where, okay, this person has got to spend an hour a day thinking about it. And sometimes that can be compulsive. I must spend the hour thinking about this. I must spend this much time doing the thing to help get rid of the anxiety.
so again, very similar to addiction. And it's, I guess what I'm saying here too is like, we've all had thoughts like that. Don't go calling a therapist just because you had a weird thought one day. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? But when your life starts to be negatively impacted by it,
Yeah.
it's probably time to
Yeah.
to seek some help, right?
Yeah. And remember, Ben, if I have and there's scientific names for the thoughts that honestly I couldn't tell you right now. There's a whole thing in learning about different thoughts. Some thoughts we purposely think, others just come in and out. We're not aware of many thoughts. We have thousands of thoughts, right? And for the person with OCD, when one of those random kind of intrusive thoughts pop in, it's like the person with OCD clings to that. So,
Yeah,
whereas someone without that, it just, oh, that was weird, move on. But when I'm predisposed to OCD, it's like I'm clinging and I am now obsessed with the fact that I have thought this. And I'm obsessed with the fact that it's popping again now. This is upsetting me. And if you don't know about OCD, you think you're crazy. You think you are. You think,
yeah,
oh my gosh, only a crazy person would think something like this. And
yeah,
that's terrifying because you're not crazy.
yeah. That goes into another good question that we can talk about. What do you think people with OCD wish the world knew about their struggles that even loved ones might not fully understand?
That they're not crazy, that they do not want to have these thoughts. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame wrapped into all this, right? So I think that The biggest one is knowing that this is not something I want to be dealing with at all. I wish I didn't have to spend 3 hours a day doing this compulsion. I know it upsets my family. I know it's inconveniencing those around me. It's making us late to this. I got to have my family member check one more time for that or whatever it might be. So it's just not something I want. It's that I am stuck in a loop now, that circle. Like I got to send you a picture if you want to like put it on your podcast because it's important. That I can't break this. I can't break this need to get this anxiety lower by compulsing, having the compulsions. And that's when the ERP treatment comes in.
Very interesting. Yes, send me that. I'll definitely post it up when this is airing. How does OCD differ from the way pop culture portrays it? And are there any harmful stereotypes? We talked a little bit about that at the beginning, like people just saying, oh, my OCD is kicking in. But are there other ways that pop culture is really doing this an injustice?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of movies and shows that really hit on the cleanliness thing, right? Things must be clean. Things must be order. And while that's part of OCD, that the form it can take, some of the other forms we're talking about, there's a lot of forms of OCD, right? The harm OCD. Some people have, after having a baby, some issues with OCD. There's relationship OCD. People can have OCD regarding religion, regarding sexual orientation, again, obsessions. So the things being in order and clean is for some reason the big thing in TV and stuff, but it's really only a small fraction what people might deal with. I think that's probably the biggest one. And we got to remember again, like we spoke about earlier, that when people with OCD see that, they think that's what it is. I must not have it if because this is about being clean and orderly. And that's for me. I obsessively think about my religion. So that's what makes it different. Does that make sense?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but hoarding is a type of OCD, correct? Yeah, we were talking about pop culture and I was thinking that I wonder what hoarding is considered. And not speaking from a professional standpoint, if this isn't your field, but just from a personal opinion, is that show doing a disservice and injustice to the people that struggle, hoarders?
Oh,
have you seen that
probably.
show? I don't know if it's still airing. Like I may be like way out in left field right now. It may be.
I'll tell you what, as much as that's been in pop culture with that hoarding show, I didn't know what you're talking about. It's never one I've had in my clinic, surprisingly.
Gotcha.
Never one I've had.
Yeah, it's just an interesting one to me because I feel so bad for these people on this show because like you're seeing the worst of somebody who has this disorder, this hoarding disorder where they got mountains of stuff and they're living in filth. And it's like, they don't want to live that way. It's a disorder. And here we are with cameras, shining cameras on these people. And it's just, terrible. I feel the same way about the show Intervention too. And all of the addiction type shows, the recovery where the celebrity recovery or whatever that's called. It's just, I understand people want to watch that. It's like watching a train wreck. People want to see that. And it is, but on the other end of it, it's also like, I think about it, is it bringing awareness to the issue and making and destigmatizing it? Because I think if it's done well, that could be the case. Like in my case, I have a page when I started A String of Hope. It was dedicated strictly to addiction. And I was speaking openly and I was interviewing people in recovery, talking about the deepest, darkest things that they have gone through. And my hope is that I did it with class and gracefully to where it brought awareness and maybe helped somebody that was struggling with it rather than preying on the people just to get a click or a video view or whatever.
That's the difference right there.
And I think that's a fine line.
Oh, yeah. Even the Dr. Phil show, before I really was super in mental health, I was like, I love Dr. Phil show. And then the more you watch it and you talk to other clinicians, he is not someone the field is proud of in any way, shape, or form. of putting these people really just at the most severe end of the spectrum on stage in front of an audience.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think what you're describing you did with your show, that's 100% different than stuff like Dr. Phil or the Warding Show. I don't know. That's my opinion on it. I think that people that watch those sort of things, they're having a lot of judgment. And again, everybody with mental health issues must be crazy. And that's not something we want to
Right.
be putting out there, is my opinion.
Yeah. I think about that often. And like I mentioned, it's a fine line. I create media on a daily basis, and I'm talking about some really difficult things,
Yeah,
typically from my own perspective of things that I've gone through.
sure,
And I never want to come across as though I'm trying to monetize
sure.
on people's misfortune or people's struggles or even my own struggles. It's all about awareness. But what gets difficult is all of a sudden you're posting this content, you're doing it for the right reasons. And I talked about this on the last podcast too.
Yeah.
I guess it's going to be a topic that I nail home. But when you start to get like social media really messes with you, all of a sudden you get a video that gets 1 million views or gets 10 million views, whatever it ends up being. And it's the next one doesn't, and then the next one doesn't, and you only get a
Yeah.
few views, and your brain starts thinking of ways like, how do I get that? How
Sure.
do I get that to take off again?
Yeah,
And that takes you to a scary place of
it does.
potentially making you step out of character and do
That's right.
something that you wouldn't want to do. And
Right.
so I understand how it happens and why shows like Hoarders or Dr. Phil exist. There's whole crews of people that are making money and making a livelihood based off of the ratings on these shows. So
That's
they're
right.
doing things as a group and pushing it out there. And it's just, I think it always needs to be a question of our society of how we're doing that and why we're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, and Ben, and you
Well,
are so true to yourself, and you always have been. I've been watching your journey these past couple of years doing all this stuff. So I think even that awareness that you have right there, that hey, this is how this can happen. Think about it.
yeah,
People want to see the wild stuff,
right.
right? So even being able to acknowledge, hey, I feel the urge to step out of character here and making the decision to stay true to who I am. It's
Yeah, yeah,
very hard.
very
I
much
hear it.
so. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday about that. Um, and I'll get vulnerable here. I haven't posted a video to my social media for numerous reasons. One reason is I've been working really hard on launching this podcast, and it's a
Yeah.
lot of work to
Oh,
get
I
this
bet.
thing going. But the other reason is I feel like for the past 10 days, even longer, I haven't had much to say because my page is about hope and finding joy, and I haven't felt that lately.
Yeah.
I've really been internalizing everything that's happening in the world, the fires in LA, the drones. I don't know if you know
Mhm.
anything about the drones in New Jersey or really all over the world that nobody seems to know what they are. They're flying over military bases. It's
Heard
very
about that.
strange. I'm surprised about how many people haven't heard about that because that's a
Sure.
big deal. There's these weird drones flying over cities and mostly in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And our government has had press conferences about it, and they just say they don't know what it is. There's nothing to worry about. It's like, how do you know it's nothing to
Right.
worry about if you don't know what it is?
Sure.
And clearly it's probably them. But yeah, the drones, the fires, everything else, the political discourse that's going on in the world, I've just been taking it all in, and it's really affecting me. I don't know why, but it's caused me to spiral into a little bit of
Sure.
depression lately. And
Yep.
my conversation with my friend yesterday was I told him that I haven't been posting because that's not what I do. That's not what I want to put out there. And he inspired me a little bit by saying people want to see like the hope and they want to see the solution and how you got out, but sometimes people want to see what it's like when you're in the middle of it.
That's right.
Um, So I think I'm going to get back into posting some videos. I'm just concerned about being real because I have to be real when I'm doing this. Otherwise, I just won't post it because it won't be authentic.
That's
It
right.
needs to be something that's coming from the heart. So I think I'm going to try it and just put it all out there and see what happens. And, you know,
Yes.
worst case scenario, like I got to take them down or whatever. Or
That's right.
maybe they only last for a couple weeks where they're up there.
Yeah.
If
Share that
anybody
with
that's
me.
listening, yeah, I was going to say, anybody that's listening who's wondered where I've been, that's your explanation 39 minutes or 35 minutes into this podcast. If you
Yeah.
like, the true followers are definitely going to hear this because they're going to listen to this whole podcast.
Sure. Sure. Then here's the thing that is wild and that, but so powerful. Again, that vulnerability.
Mm,
People want it. That because
yeah.
why? It promotes connection. What do we want as creatures, right? As mammals, we want connection. We want
Yeah.
connection. And that's
Yeah.
been hard for me as a therapist because my job is to help someone with their problem. It's not about me. What we call self-disclosure, right? And what that means is the ability for me to share a little tiny bit to help with that connection. And it is so uncomfortable. But every time I do it, that's a client that's going to be with me for a while because we're actually connecting as human beings, right? And there's always a fear of it, right? The fear of just being honest that, dude, I'm having a hard time.
Yeah.
I'm on the struggle bus. And guess what? I'm on the struggle bus sometimes too. We all are,
Hmm.
right? But there is so much power in saying that because we've all been there. We've all been on the struggle bus. None of us are perfect, right? It's
Yeah.
so awesome to me when I see other therapists saying that. Like, dude, I don't have it all figured out all the time.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
We
Because then you feel like seen by them, because just because you're a therapist doesn't mean you're going to have it all
no,
together. That's not how it works.
no,
So you mentioned something about connection and that we all want that. And I want to bring up, I started this Community Joy Academy, and you are a big part of me starting that. Actually, I called you and I got your advice on it. And I can't thank you enough for helping me. You're a part of the group. You're in there. We have these weekly meetings that we do for Joy Academy. And every week I always bring up that we all want the same thing because there's people from all over the world. There's people from
yeah,
the Philippines, from Bangladesh, from Canada, from New Zealand, and obviously different places in the United States that are there. And I just like to make it clear that we all want the same things. We all want love. We all want to feel safe. And I think that's that's an important thing to call out. So I
yes,
just wanted to say that I appreciate you saying that. And more than that, give a shameless plug to Joy Academy. And more than that,
yes.
thank you so much for being a
Oh
big
my
part of
gosh.
helping me to have the courage to do it.
Wow. Well, that's an honor. I had no idea I had that influence and you're so welcome. You're amazing, Ben.
You've been such a supporter of me from the sidelines since I started A String of Hope, just because obviously we know each other, and I wouldn't say we grew up together, but we went to church together growing up.
Yeah.
And we're obviously in similar fields. You're in the behavioral health field, and I'm trying to bring awareness to behavioral health. And it's been really good to see people like you and a few other friends that are professionals out there just rally behind me, even if it's just a comment and a
Yeah.
post. Like, this is really cool. You're doing a great job. Like, it really means a lot and it keeps me going.
I love that.
I get thousands of comments, and it's amazing from people all over the world. And but it just takes one bad one to ruin my day. I'm a very
Oh, yeah.
sensitive person.
Sure.
So how does OCD affect relationships?
Mm,
And what advice would you give to partners or
yeah.
friends trying to support someone with OCD?
Ooh, that's a toughie. Because here's the thing with the family, it's like, oh, I want my loved one to feel better. So therefore, let me keep giving them the reassurance
Mm,
because they're asking for it. And I've seen it. I've seen people beg for, please tell me that I did this 3 times, whatever it is. Or a lot of, are you sure this won't happen? Or like asking the family member, are you sure this won't happen if I insert whatever it is? And the family member that doesn't have the education on OCD I want my loved one to feel better. So gosh, I'm like, okay, do I got to tell you 20 times today? Let me remind you 20 times. Let me provide that reassurance. Reassurance is a huge part of OCD because one of the other biggest words associated with OCD is uncertainty. And people with OCD really want that certainty of certain things that is not available. So they're always trying to get, are you certain? I don't want to, back to the example of the killing self thing, the thought that pops. Are you sure? Like, I need to know for certain that this is absolutely not what I want to do. So the family member needs to have the education and awareness, read up on it, see how this thing works, right? I call it a separate thing. The OCD brain is here and it's taking over, right? Understand that, get the education, because what you need to learn is that reassurance is making this all worse. We've got to stop with the reassurance. We got to stop providing that to the person. And we need to have that conversation with them. Once they begin ERP treatment, is sitting down maybe with a therapist to tell the person, we're going to have to cut back on the reassurance. What does that look like? What's manageable? Right? Because it just keeps the cycle going. So that's a big one. And getting support and help. The International OCD Foundation is a great website. Lots of resources on there as well for family. Talk to somebody.
Okay.
That's what we'll say.
That's another interesting kind of connection to addiction that I can make. And I realize that they're two different things, but it reminds me of enabling, when a partner will enable the other by giving them money or giving them some kind of support that's going to continue their addiction. That's interesting that you bring that up. And I'm gonna think about that, because it's such a difficult thing to do, because you feel like you're loving the person. You feel like you're doing the right thing. Sometimes what we think is the right thing is exactly the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to speak with a professional or reach out to the resources that you just mentioned and educate yourself about it. And that's a big thing that my wife and my parents did for me.
Sure.
When I was struggling with addiction, was they educated themselves. They read Alcoholics Anonymous. They went to Al-Anon meetings. They ended up going to meetings with me.
Wow.
And I think that's probably the same scenario with any mental disorder. Is educate yourself, because when you know more, you can help more.
That's right. I love that. And I think it's so powerful what you said, what we're talking about with, okay, I think this is helpful, because again, it's giving the person temporary relief, even with the addiction stuff. We need to look at big picture. This is unhelpful. This is reinforcing all the stuff we don't want to see.
So what's the role of intrusive thoughts in OCD, and why, like, this is the important part of this question. Why do people feel that those thoughts are so real? Why do they feel so real to people who experience them?
Gosh, I'll try to answer it, because I think we've hit on it a little bit, in that people take a thought at face value. The example I always give with my clients that sit here, I have a big, beautiful window right here I'm always looking at. And I tell them, I was like, okay, if you come in here and I said to you, Ben, the sky is orange, what would you say to me?
Say, no, it's not.
It's not orange. Now, just because I think in my brain a thought comes in, that sky must be orange, it doesn't mean it's orange, right? So we have to remember, with the intrusive thoughts, what happens is people have the thought, right? And then it's like, oh my gosh, emergency. This must be true that I've thought this. So again, dang it, it's setting off all the alarm bells. Emergency. Why would I think this? This is terrible. What do I got to do to get rid of this thought, to get rid of this feeling? Instead of recognizing, hey, a thought is a thought. I thought
Yeah.
all thoughts aren't accurate. I can think all sorts of things that aren't true. But that's what happens with the intrusive thoughts is I think a lot of the times is I take them at face value and it becomes an obsession. Now, ruminations that can be associated with OCD or not is when I really just have the same things, whether they be alarming or not, popping in my head. Like, let's say I can't stop thinking about my finances. Here's an example. Can't stop thinking about it. I keep thinking about it. I don't want to think about it anymore. And addressing it can be similar to the obsessions in that I have to learn to let thoughts pass by like they would be a train. I have to learn just because I'm having a thought doesn't mean I need to do anything with it right now. I have to learn to let it come and let it go, which is a big part of this work. I have to learn to accept my thoughts without judgment, knowing that when I pay a smaller amount of attention to this, it starts to chill out. One of the examples I think we should give your audience about this, and I know I go off on tangents all the time, by the way. I'm probably not even talking about what we started with, but is the blue bunny example. The blue bunny example is great. Do you want to do it?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Let's do it. This is so cool. So this is, and I do this with my clients. Everybody's like, what the heck are we doing here? Well, we're doing the blue bunny example. So here's what it looks like is you're going to try, we can do it less for time's sake, for 30 seconds to get an A+ on not thinking about a blue bunny. Okay. Should we actually do it for 30 seconds?
I can tell you that I've already thought of a blue bunny.
Right. Right. Yeah. If you were to sit here and I'm like, don't think of anything else, but not that, guess what would happen? Just what you just
think
said.
Of it.
Again, when it comes to thoughts, if I try to just block a thought and don't think of it anymore, the thought's going to be like, but I'm here. So if I don't want to push a thought out because it comes stronger, but I also don't want to, I call it the rabbit hole, speaking about bunnies, take the thought and hyperanalyze it to death, then what do I want to do? And what I want to do is practice that, letting it come and go.
Yeah.
Here's what that looks like. Here's this thought. I notice it's having my heart beat a little faster. This thought is here. I notice it makes me uncomfortable. So I'm not pushing and I'm not hyperanalyzing. I'm letting it be. And the more I do that, the more the thoughts kind of start to drift to the back. Like, oh.
I know I'm beating the same drum here, but I just can't help but continuing to connect it to addiction in my own experience because that's what I know. And just the fact of like having cravings for something. And what do you do with that? What are your coping mechanisms when that happens? And how do you let it pass?
Yes.
I find it very similar to that.
Yes.
And it's like, how do you get to a point and how do your coping mechanisms become so strong and grounded that you actually start to see healing, you start to see recovery or start to see change? Do you have any tips on that, on like specific coping mechanisms?
Gosh. Yeah. And what I tell people too is you got to remember your brain's been working a certain way for a really long time, right? And when you're asking it to do healthier things, this is going to take time. I'm learning new, I'm practicing that neuroplasticity, right? The brain's flexible. So I'm starting to learn a new pathway. The more I do the healthy coping thing, the more I'm reinforcing it. So what you're reminding me there with the addiction, which I think, by the way, that strategy I just gave with it's really mindfulness of thoughts. That's what that is. I am being mindful and aware of my thought, but non-reactive to it.
Yeah.
But it also reminds me of urge surfing with the addiction stuff. It's noticing that urge. I see what it's doing to my body, and I'm going to ride the wave of this urge, knowing that it will decrease.
That's
right?
the first time I've heard that.
Urge surfing.
I've never heard that in all my years and all the people I've talked to. That's pretty great. Urge surfing. Ride the wave. And what do you do? Like, What do you like? You just explain to me what that means to you, riding the
Mhm.
wave. Like it comes and you hop on it and you ride it to where?
Yeah. So it's riding the wave. It's a lot of this, honestly, which I do think mindfulness is boring, but a lot of this is rooted in it. It's this awareness and acceptance without judgment. So while I'm riding the wave, I'm just experiencing all the things that comes with it, right? I'm like on a surfboard. Oh, okay. Here comes anger about that. All right. And I am noticing and describing. I'm noticing what's happening. I'm describing it to myself. It's almost a way to step outside of my emotion mind into a wise mind place where I can respond differently. So I'm riding the wave wherever it takes me, knowing though that with the urges pass. This intense urge I feel right now, it's so strong. I want to do this. Well, it's not going to stay. Feelings aren't permanent. It's not going to stay. So ride the wave. Might take five
Yeah,
minutes, might take 10. I don't know. Let's see. We don't know where it's going to
yeah,
take us. Again, uncertainty. We got to accept that and just see what
yeah.
happens. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. So I love that I learned something new
Yeah,
about coping mechanisms within addiction. This too shall pass. It's an important
that's
thing
right.
for everybody to remember. If anybody's out there struggling with anything,
That's right.
that's one of the biggest things that's helped me is like, this isn't forever.
Yeah.
And you made an important point of you have to feel your feelings. Like there's going to be feelings that come with it and you have to feel them. It's when you try to escape them, at least in addiction. I don't know about
Yes.
how that relates to OCD, but in addiction, like you're going to have to feel your
You have to.
feelings and
Got
you're
to
going to
do it.
get better at feeling them as you do this. And as you ride that wave, you're going to get better. It's going to get easier, but you
That's
just
right.
have to remember exactly what she said is like, this wave isn't forever. There's going to be another one
No.
that comes after
Yeah.
it, but
Yeah.
just
No
ride it, man.
feeling is final. Yeah. No feeling is final. And honestly, as we talk about the addiction, we talk about OCD, we talk about really any disorder you'd find in the DSM. If you really think about it, a lot of this is the unwillingness for people to want to feel feelings they don't like.
Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
that's how these unhealthy coping stuff comes from. I don't want to
Right.
have to feel this.
Yeah,
But we
exactly.
know that if I learn how to feel it, I can move through it quicker. That's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard for me. I've been a therapist 15 years. I don't feel it either. We have to. We have to learn.
I love that you brought up mindfulness and I love that you said it's boring because I feel the same way, but also I know how powerful it is. And that's again, not to like give myself another shameless plug, but in the book I wrote, there is a section about that.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. Do you have anything more to say about that specifically?
When I'm practicing, when we're talking about what skills of mindfulness, I'm observing, describing, and participating. That is what I'm doing in mindfulness. The how skills of mindfulness, like how do I be mindful? Well, I do it mindfully and I do it effectively, right? And that's in non-judgmental, by the way. So there's a whole thing in DBT about it. So if anybody wanted another resource on mindfulness, you can look at dialectical behavioral therapy. There's a whole section on mindfulness there that you can
Okay.
probably get free on Google.
Yeah.
Search.
The section I wrote in my book, it's actually the chapter's called Mindful Mindfulness.
Mm.
And it ties into what you said about it being boring a little bit because for me, it sounds weird, but I have to force myself to be mindful. I
Oh my
have to be
gosh.
mindful about the fact that I need to be mindful about something. And one trick that helped me in early recovery was to set alarms on my phone.
Love
And
that.
I would set these alarms every hour, and the alarm would tell me to stop and close my eyes and take 10 deep breaths
I
and
love,
think about a waterfall or think about
yeah.
something else and just relax and just think about the good things. I think that's important because if you're not naturally prone to like just go sit in the corner and meditate or do whatever, you might need to set a timer. You might
Yeah.
need to
You
be
do.
mindful about when to be mindful. It
Yeah.
could help,
No,
even though
it
it feels
does.
like it might be boring. Like it's a tool that I feel like has a lot of research behind it,
Yeah.
and it really works is what's
Yes.
important. And that's a big struggle with a lot of these behavioral health issues is it's like obviously there's medications and stuff you can give for specific things, but a lot of it is really like the work that you have to do from within. And a very big tool that you have to do that is mindfulness.
Yeah.
So I love that you bring it
Yeah.
up. I love that you said it's a little bit boring because I feel exactly the same way,
Right.
but it's just, it's a tool that works.
Yeah. And let me just touch on one other thing with why it's boring. If you really think about American culture, we're asked on the regular, multitask, do it all, get it done. We are asked to do, we are not trained to be mindful creatures here in the United States. And what that's causing it is causing me to be thinking about the past, present, future. Okay, past, present, future, past, present, future. I am in 3 different realities and I'm all over the place now. We're all of us really Americans. We're just, we're all this stuff. Why is it boring? Because mindfulness is asking me to just be now.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that you're doing, you just be here. So if you're starting mindfulness, start it for a couple seconds at a time and work your way
Yeah.
up because it's a lot. It's a lot to get there.
And that goes into the whole like one day at a time type thing.
Mhm.
Don't try to figure out the big picture
No.
right now. You're never going to be able to do that. First of all, just think about what's the next step. What's the
Oh,
next right thing to do for what you're going through? And I'm sure the same goes for OCD. It's like, what's the next right step? Maybe it means being mindful, and maybe it means going and telling somebody what you're experiencing. Um, that's a good segue into this other question, which is what does recovery look
yeah.
like from OCD?
Yeah.
Uh, is it about eliminating OCD entirely or learning to live with it?
Yeah. It's learning to live with it. And it is really the big thing again with OCD is again, a willingness to learn to cope with uncertainty. So when we're talking about really treatment for OCD, right? I'm learning how to live with this not being my identity. I'm learning that this is a part of me that pops up, it flares at times, but it's not going to run my life anymore. Right. I think trying to get rid of it completely is setting an unrealistic expectation. It is how can I learn to cope? Like I said, it doesn't run my life. And the way I'm doing it, gold standard treatment, OCD, ERP, exposure response prevention. You got to get with a therapist that can do that. And you show up in a therapist office that's not trained in OCD, and some of the stuff you're saying, they're going to be like, not doing the right thing. So we really need to identify a provider that does ERP. And ERP is breaking the cycle. It's called exposure response prevention. I am breaking that loop, right? I'm doing it by learning to accept, learning to tolerate distress. I am gradually reducing compulsions and exposing myself to anxiety. That's what I'm doing. I'm slowly creating a hierarchy of fears that that exposes me to this anxiety systematically and helps me to learn that, oh my gosh, this is okay. It's really some of my favorite work that I do is exposures because I see people getting so much better with it and being able to really say, wow, this thing I thought was the end of the world here. Now I'm doing things about associated with this and I'm okay. This is okay. And learning that now this no longer runs my life. So, and do you want me to give you an example and a
Yeah,
hierarchy?
absolutely. Talk about that. And then, if you don't mind, segue into I'd love to know about how you treat using ERP. Like, are you able to treat people on a call like this, or does that sort of thing have to happen in person? I'm very curious about that.
No, it can absolutely happen on a call with the exposures, what we're doing, again, like we're going over skills, we're learning how to breathe, we're learning how we're getting psychoeducation on OCD, recognizing thinking errors, learning mindfulness, and then I'm starting my hierarchy. So I'm getting some tools under my belt because I'm preparing to expose myself to anxiety. We're purposely doing it in an efforts to rewire the way my brain is functioning. And I can't do that when fear is not involved. I have to activate my amygdala. And we could talk about this for hours, but I have
Yeah.
to activate it to get it the opportunity to learn from a new experience. Right.
Yeah.
So basically, well, an example, like let's say someone, the vomiting thing's coming to me into my mind. Okay.
Mm.
We might create this person a hierarchy. We're going to buy some fake vomit. Okay, that's going to be involved here. We might have an exposure of observing and describing that. We might watch videos of people vomiting, maybe cartoons, and then segue into real people. Then we might make some fake vomit. We're brainstorming together. We're coming up with these things that, oh, that would make me uncomfortable. All the way that would panic me. And we are
Yeah.
systematically tackling them with all the skills we've learned to no longer have this run my life. That I can see
Yeah.
this or feel sick and not have a panic attack.
That's so interesting to me because obviously you want to do this in a therapeutic setting, whether that's on a call or not. You want to do this with a professional who knows how to
Yeah.
walk it back because I can see that could potentially be very dangerous
Oh,
for the
yeah.
person too. And in addiction, sorry to keep bringing it back to that. Obviously,
No,
this is
I
about
love it.
OCD. It's my experience. In addiction, it's like I help build websites, a company called Brand North, and it's for behavioral health websites. And we have to be very careful what pictures we use so we're not triggering people,
Yep.
right? And it reminds me of the same thing. It's like, again, you don't like as like somebody's parent or brother and sister or friend, you don't want to go just tell them like, oh, let's just look at vomit videos
Oh, no.
because you can really cause harm. Like this needs
Yes.
to be done with a professional who understands how to do it and set it up. And
Yeah.
I wanted to make clear, yeah, I wanted to make clear that you're able to do that on a call because I do want to make sure people know that you're potentially available. Like I don't want to speak for
Yeah.
you. I don't know your availability, but if somebody's out there struggling with OCD or anything like that,
Please.
I'll have Brooke's information posted so you guys can
Yeah.
reach her somehow about it. But it's very interesting. This whole conversation, just the like how I was able to connect it to that made it easier for
Yeah.
me. That's just how I
Well,
process things. I got to see things through my own lens, you
sure.
know? And
I love it.
did you have more thoughts on that?
Yeah, honestly, Ben, I could talk about it till I'm blue in the face. There's so much to say about this topic. And I struggle with like the science part of it, like the neuropsychology, all that, because it's so interesting when you really look at, well, why do I expose? Like people will tell me, why am I gonna, I don't get why I'm doing this scary thing. Why are you wanting me to do this? And that's why it's so important when you're doing OCD work, you really have sessions really dedicated to the psychoeducation piece, really understanding why am I doing this? I'm trying to create new pathways in my brain and I have to have experience to do that. Like the amygdala, and again, we won't go all into it, but I will say this. The amygdala is part of your brain that's associated with all of this stuff, right? And here's the thing, while self-talk is great, and we should do that, and that's a great pathway, one of the ways anxiety can respond is that. The other way is through the amygdala, and the amygdala does not understand words. It understands experiences. So I can't
Got
just say, "Oh, amygdala, chill out with the anxiety." It doesn't
it.
understand that. It has to do it and realize, "I'm okay." It has to
Yeah.
have the new experience. So this is why we expose. And we also expose to I have some people do exposures that we want to do it so much that I'm over this. This is no longer making me anxious. And actually, it's annoying. Great. I've done my job. So we could talk about it all day, but yes, if you're struggling with OCD, please know you do not have to look this way. You don't.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story from when I was younger. For some reason, I forget what movie it was. I think it was Look Who's Talking Now.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there was a scene in that movie where the toilet turned into a monster. And after I saw that scene, I was terrified to use the
Yeah.
toilet. And this is so embarrassing. I'm about to say this, but I'm going to
Just
say
say it.
it. I was like 4 or 5 years old. I would go and instead of using the restroom, I peed in the corner of my room a few
Oh,
times. And
bless your heart.
obviously, like my mom figured it out pretty quick and she realized what happened. And what she did was she drew a toilet on a piece of paper and she's like, okay, now we're going to rip this up and we're going to
Mm.
flush it. So
Yeah.
I don't know if she like did a little mini version of what you're talking about,
Yeah.
but she just, it seems like it's similar to that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I
I'm,
remember that scene of that movie, and
do
I
you really?
remember not liking that at all when I was a kid. I do. I
Now
do
there's
remember
like
that.
now there's like YouTube videos with people that have like snakes in their
Oh
toilet
my
and
gosh.
so many
Yeah.
more scary videos than that. I think I looked back at that video like years later and it's so cheesy and bad, but for some reason my 4-year-old brain saw that and like said I can't
I'm scared.
I can't go to the toilet
Oh,
even to pee at this point. So I don't remember how long
survival.
that lasted. I'm sure my mom will listen to this and she'll like call me and tell
Comment.
me that I was
Tell us.
good
I love
old
that.
Nana Cat
Bless your heart.
Fisher.
Right. No, yeah,
So
I definitely remember that. I do.
yeah, that's funny. My mom treated me though. My mom was my therapist for that. Thank you so
I love
much,
it.
Nana
I
Cat.
love it.
Love you.
Very cool.
So before we close,
Mhm.
the most important thing that I want to put out there into the world is just inspiration and hope. I want people to know that they're not so far gone. They're not broken. They're not bad people. They just may need a little bit of help. And I would love for you to give your best minute long advice or support or
Yeah.
cheerleader moment for anybody just to let them
Yes.
know that they can be okay and they can get through
Yes.
this.
Yes. Gosh, I gotta say this because this is the one that pops in. You are not crazy. You're not crazy. You are a normal human being. We all have different things. All of us have different things. I will tell you this. I have spoken to people you would never think would be in my office. We all have stuff. So I think a big part of this is accepting that, you know what? This is what my stuff looks like and it's okay. And recognizing that I don't have to live a way that is no longer serving my life. It's no
Mm,
longer serving me. If I have coped with whatever feeling, OCD or whatever it is, this certain way for so long, maybe it served me at one time, but there are other ways I can learn to deal with this, right? I'm not
yeah,
hopeless. There is relief. No feeling is final. Feelings aren't facts either. That's the other one. Thoughts aren't facts. Thoughts aren't final, right? All of these things are temporary. Now, that doesn't mean they're not distressing, but they're temporary. So just, I think, knowing that you're not alone and knowing that there's help available. It's just taking that step to reach out, practicing that vulnerability, which is uncomfortable, but accepting that, hey, I need some help, like you said, Ben, and it's there. And if I'm not the
yeah,
right person, I know all sorts of therapists. Send you to the right one.
love that. Thank you. I think you said it all. I love the line, feelings aren't facts. I've heard that one. I
Yeah.
haven't heard feelings aren't final. I love that one.
You know,
I think that's so
all
important.
feelings
And
are
it just,
temporary.
yeah, it ties back to the whole this too shall pass concept. I love I love that I was able to relate it to my own
Yeah.
experiences. Like this conversation was, you say you could talk about this for hours. I could listen to you talk about this for hours just because it feels so relatable.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if like what is the in and I don't want you to like just throw a number out if you don't know. You can say I don't
Yeah.
know, but like how many people in general deal with some type of OCD? Like what are we looking at
Yeah.
in America or
You know,
in the world?
I don't know off the top of my head. So I'll be honest with you. I have to do a quick Google search, but it's more frequent than you would think, right? When we're looking at even just depression, anxiety in general, some of the most common issues when it comes to mental health that people deal with, it's pretty high. It would be interesting for us. Maybe we can get some statistics page along with my little thing I'm going to send you to show that it's a
Yeah.
lot more out there than you would think.
Yeah.
Really
We'll
is.
find those statistics and
Yeah.
probably flash them up on the screen while we're talking about this because that's what I'm gathering too. It's the same. We have a mental health epidemic in the
Mhm.
United States, and I believe across the globe. I don't know what's causing it. That's probably another conversation for another time. We'll have to have you back on and we can talk about that. A quote comes to mind. I can't remember who said it, but it was something along the lines of we need to stop pulling people out of the river and we need to walk upstream and find out why they're falling in. And I know some of this mental health issues are hereditary or genetics. There's a lot of factors that factor into it, but it really seems like it's a curve that's going up and to the right. You know
Sure.
what I mean? And it keeps growing at a faster and faster rate. And with this show, with the Inspire sessions, I don't just want to meet with inspiring people like you, just to meet with them and put a bunch of hope and inspiration out there. Like, I'd love to have some real impact and make
Yes.
change in the world. And it's people like you that are going to help me to do that. With that said, I can't thank you enough for spending this hour and 20 minutes with me out of your time. I always enjoy having
I
a
was,
conversation with you. I'm glad that we were able to document one. And yeah, I just thank you so much. And we'll see
my
you
goodness.
around Enjoy Academy. We'll see you around on
Yeah.
whatever social media apps don't get banned in the next several days. I think I don't know if you've heard that TikTok is about to be banned in like 5 days. So
Oh
that's awesome.
boy, I
Yeah.
haven't. That's a new one. And Ben, I will tell you too, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to be on the show. And it's also an honor to see just your message of joy and hope is so inspirational for me as well. And so I thank you for being the person that's putting that in there out there for us and for being real. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you.
Yeah. This was great. I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of
Me
fun
too.
talking about mental health. I got plenty of issues.
Oh,
And
we
I
all do.
know that's an important thing to make sure people understand too. Like, you're not just an OCD specialist. You do treat many other things, anxiety and different things. You mentioned that at the beginning, I think, but wanted to reiterate that. So
Yeah,
anybody that is struggling with anything mental health, we'll have the contact information for Brooke. Make sure that you reach out to her. She can help you. If she's not the right person to help you, she can get you in contact with the right person. So
that's
again,
exactly
Brooke,
right.
thank you. Thank you for everything. And thank you all for listening. Make sure that you share, subscribe, like, do all the stuff on every platform. And it's going to help us to reach more people because that's what it's going to take. I mentioned changing the world and making the world a better place. It starts with simply subscribing or sharing and getting this out there.
Yes.
That's it. So, with that being said, peace. We'll see you next time.